what I'm going to do now is to give you an overview of the data model that we are going to use in order to understand SQL. Yeah, we will start with simple SQL today, and then it will get complexer during the next weeks. If you look at this data model here, the first observation is that I have used the tabular representation of the data model as well as the structural representation. Yeah, since both presentation here fit on one slide, we can have both here together, and that we can have the advantages of both kinds of presentation. So let's start with the tabular representation. So we have an employee table here, yeah, and we have some columns in it, like the last name, the hire date, the salary, and some kind of bonus that that an employee might have, yeah. And we have, for example, organizational units here, yeah. I will come to that in a moment. We have a hierarchical structure here. So on the top level, we have the organizational unit that's the company itself. And then we have finance and accounting, and we have production, yeah, and controlling and so on, yeah. So we have seen here the employee table, that's the data here, and we have seen the org unit table, that's the data here. And let's take a look at the project table here. We have some projects, yeah. So projects are non-repeated activities. That's not the usual operation within the company, but these are singular activities that have a certain time frame, that have a certain goal, that have a budget in order to do something within the company. For example, to restructure accounting or restructure a plant, yeah, or for example, implement a new accounting software, yeah, or introducing a customer relationship management system, or do some kind of HR activities, yeah, in order to have a better processes there. It could be everything, yeah. And so I have just taken here some examples, yeah, of that, of possible projects. So you see, we have the projects here, yeah. The employee project I will come to in a moment, but let's first get a deeper understanding of these tables we have already seen, yeah. Just a moment, I would like to talk here, for example, about the organizational structuring. Just a moment. Atomic condition, total calculation and condition. For whatever reason, I lost something. Just a moment. No, that's not here. Okay, so where has it gone? Nowhere. Hierarchy, is it here? Ah, here it is. Sorry. So, and maybe I should put it over here. So back again. You see we have this org unit table here. And there is a suspicious looking arrow here, yeah, pointing from the organizational unit onto itself. And if you remember last week's lecture, such kind of arrow, that's a foreign key. And this foreign key is pointing from the column subunit to the primary key, to the OUID. You see subunit equals OUID. Yeah, that's a connection that is made here. And now let's try to see why that represents a organizational hierarchy. So again, we have the table here, and I have added this foreign key here, going from subunit to OUID. Let's take the company here, the company record. Yeah, so the company record has the OUID number 1. Yeah, and it has as a subunit itself. You see the subunit, the foreign key subunit with number 1 is pointing to the OUID 1, and that means it's pointing onto itself, and that's the representation of the root of the hierarchy. Yeah, it's just pointing onto itself. Might be a little bit strange for you at first sight, but that is a possible way to designate roots within hierarchies. The other one would be to have a null value. Yeah, that's also a possibility. I've chosen here to let it point onto itself. So let's take org unit number 2 here. You see that this is the OUID is the primary key. It has the primary key number 2, and that's finance and accounting. And you see finance and accounting also has as a subunit the number 1. And you know number 1 is company. So finance and accounting is directly below company. Production. Production is number 3. It also has subunit number 1, as you see. So that means production is also directly below company. Then we have controlling. Controlling has number 4 as a primary key and number 2 as a subunit. And if we look up the primary key number 2, we see it's finance and accounting. That means controlling is below finance and accounting. Plant is number 5. It is pointing to number 3. Number 3 is production. So plant is below production. And last but not least, warehouse, number 6, also pointing to subunit number 3. That's again production. So warehouse is directly below production. Yeah. Have you been able to follow? Is it clear to you that this suspicious looking foreign key onto itself is representing a hierarchy?
Professor, super unit and OUID is clear, but can you please explain this head part? What is it?
That's the next thing I'm going to explain in a moment. So the head, will come in a moment. Let's on this page here, let's concentrate on the hierarchy. Are there any questions to the hierarchy? Fine, that seems not to be the case. So let's go back here. And yeah, what's about the head? And so in order to answer the question, please take a look at the structural representation. And yeah, that also looks a little bit suspicious at first sight. Namely, we have an error, a foreign key from employee to org unit, and we have a foreign key back from org unit to employee. That's also perfectly okay for a relational data model to have it between two tables, the one way around and the other way around. Yeah. So let's first concentrate on the foreign key starting at the employee table, and you see it is called org unit. Yeah. So this column here, org unit, that is here you see it in the tabular representation, and that's a foreign key pointing to the OUID of the org unit table. Yeah, that's a primary key here. And This foreign key, and you may remember that you might remember that a foreign key is representing a one-to-many relationship. And if you look at the data here in the org unit column within the employee table, you see the numbers that are pointing to the primary keys of the org unit table. And that means, for example, Miller is working in org unit ID, or is related to org unit ID 1. Yeah, and for example, if you are taking Stone here, yeah, that he has org unit ID number 5, and that's the plant. So Stone is related to plant, yeah. Lee is related to F&A. O'Brien, which org unit is he related to? So tell me which org unit O'Brien is related to. What's the name of the org unit?
Again, F&A.
F&A. You see, O'Brien has as an org unit the number 2. You have to look up the primary key number 2, and then you find the information F&A. That's always the game with foreign keys. You have to look them up. They are just pointers. They are references to the target table. Yeah? And this arrow here, pointing from employee to org unit, could be regarded as works in, yeah, or is related to, or as part of. And so an employee is related to one org unit via that foreign key, and an org unit, you see, for example, Miller and Sanchez are both related to org unit number 1. Yeah. And for example, Ortega and Krause here are also related to org unit 3. And that means for each org unit, there could be many employees that are related to that. That, of course, makes perfectly sense, yeah, to have many employees within an organizational unit. So now let's, are there any questions with respect to that connection, with respect to that relationship? Then let's tackle the head relationship. And that also is a foreign key, but now it's pointing back to the employee table. So for example, you might have assumed that in the head of an organizational unit, I might have placed a name. Yeah, but that would not be a good idea, because I can have because then I would not have a clear connection to the employee table, since heads of companies of organizational units are also employees. Therefore, it makes perfectly sense to relate back to the employee table. And for example, if we take controlling, who is head of controlling?
Lee.
Lee. Yeah, that's correct. Because let's look, controlling here. The foreign key to the head is number 3. That's the head. Let's look up number 3 here in the employee table, and there we find Lee. Yeah. So that's always the game. And since,
Professor,
yeah.
excuse me. So the head of plant and warehouse are the same.
Yeah, that's a good observation. And if you look at that arrow here, and you know that an arrow is a one-to-many relationship, you see each organizational unit has only one head, but the same employee can serve as a head for more than one org unit. And that's the example that you have observed here. Yeah, that a plant and warehouse have the same head. So, and that's number 4, and number 4 is, as you see, Ortega. So Ortega is head of plant and warehouse at the same time.
Thank you, Professor.
But each singular organizational unit can only have one head. So that's not possible that you have in organizational units with two heads. Yeah, it could only be one head in this data model here. Yeah. So if you would have a matrix organization within a company, then that data model of being head would not be correct, because it's a one-to-many relationship, and then it might be a many-to-many relationship. Yeah. But in order to keep things simple here, and that's the usual case, the common case, I would assume, it perfectly makes sense to have a one-to-many relationship. Yeah. Okay. So now we are still missing the employee project table, emp-proj table. And before going into that, let's first figure out from a logical point of view, if we consider projects and employee, what kind of relationship do we have? Is it a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship, or is it a many-to-many relationship? What do you think?
One-to-one.
One
One-to-one.
project, multiple employees.
Like it depends, like there might be a possibility like that one employee might work on different projects. Or
That makes sense, doesn't it? One employee might be related to different projects. I assume somebody of you have already been in such a kind of situation. And the project, could it have many employees?
Yes.
Of course.
Multiple to multiple.
So,
Many to many.
so in essence, we have what kind of relationship?
Many to many.
Many to many. Yeah? It's a many to many relationship. And if you remember last week's lecture, how do we represent many to many relationships? That's done by an additional table. And that's the employee project table. Actually, that's a many-to-many relationship. And you see, so let's take a look at the tabular representation here. So let's take a look at the first record here. EID1, PID3. What does it mean? Who is working in which product if I regard that record here, the first one?
Miller is working in CRM.
That's it. Miller is working in CRM. And if I take here the second but last row here, what does it mean?
Miller is also working on accounting.
That's it. Yeah, so we see Miller is working on two projects. So we have seen Miller is working, for example, on accounting. Is there anybody else working on accounting?
Yes,
And who is it?
Sanchez.
Sanchez is.
Exactly, that's Sanchez. Yeah, number 2 here is also working on project number 1. And you see, if you look at the tabular here structural representation, we see that both columns EID and PID are underlined. And that means that we have a compound primary key. So that's one singular primary key consisting of two parts. And if we have such kind of key, that means that the combination of EID and PID values must be unique. Not each singular column on it by itself, but the combination must be unique. So we have the combination 1, 3, or for example, and we have here the combination 1, 1. And that's no conflict, even though that the number 1 appears 2 times here in that column, since the other column it's different, so the combination is different. Yeah. Therefore, there is no clash. Yeah. So the primary key still is unique. Yeah, that's often the case. If you have a many-to-many relationship, you just take the primary keys of the corresponding tables that are connected and have a compound primary key. Additionally, each of those primary keys here by itself is a foreign key to the corresponding table. You see EID, yeah, it's a foreign key to the employee table, and PID here is a foreign key to the project table. And in this case, we not only want to have that information who is connected to which project, but also the information how many hours is somebody working within the project. Yeah, and that the idea is that is the for example the weekly number of hours or something like that. Yeah, who is working on that project. Yeah, and if you assume somebody is working 40 hours per week and 10 hours per week in that project, yeah, he would work a quarter of his time within the project. Yeah. Okay, so I would say that I have now explained everything within that data model. Or have I forgot something?
Professor, can you like elaborate like how we define foreign keys?
Yeah. A foreign key, we have these if we implement tables within a database system, we designate a column as a foreign key if it points to the primary key of a second table. Yeah. So here in that course, you are not going to implement such kind of models. You do not need to define them. You just have to know what foreign keys are existing, and that's what I'm telling you here. Yeah, what are the foreign keys, and the foreign key just as a pointer. And you see, for example, if you look at this org unit foreign key, we have numbers in it, and these numbers are numbers of primary keys of the target table. And you see this one here that is pointing from employee table to org unit table, and these numbers here that point to the primary key numbers of the target table, and all those values within that column here must exist in the target. And by this, you establish a connection between the table. A foreign key is nothing else but a connection or a relationship between the table. And the foreign key must not be unique. And that means that many records on that side can be related to one record on this side. Yeah. But each singular record here can only has only one slot here and can only point to one target. Does it answer your question?
Yeah. So like the foreign key of like employee project, like EID will be primary key of this employee table, and for EID, it will be primary key of the EID table.
That's it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any further questions with respect to the data model?
Professor, if we look at the data table, which is on the right column, the middle one, it links the employee with the particular project. And since there is no information about, let's just say, employee number 3, that is EID 3. So what will happen if we are going to search for EID 3, and what's the output will be?
Yeah, that's a good observation. Of course, not all employees within the company are related to projects. Yeah, for example, number 3. Yeah, Lee. Mrs. Lee here, for example, is not a part of a project. And yeah, that is something we will see later on if we are doing analytics. Yeah, when there's a SQL operator that's called join, and we will see how the behavior of this join with respect to employees that are not within project is. The employees themselves here of course, are independent of projects. So there's no problem with Lee here. It's if you access the employee table here, yeah, you can access Lee. That's no problem at all. Yeah. The only thing is that Lee is not related to any project, and this is something that we will figure out later on.